Welcome to Transforming Work with Sophie Wade, exploring the future of work. Find out what's going on, disruptions, evolutions, opportunities, challenges, and interventions in our multi-generational distributed organizations. With a new tech and talent focus, discover what you need to know to stay upskilled and relevant and ensure your business keeps its competitive edge. Sophie investigates the promise and reality of the future of work now and as we look ahead. She interviews people who are changing work experiences and practices and shares how we can each transition smoothly and successfully to effective and more productive new ways of working.
Hi, this episode is about the future of work. A first diagnostic and progress report since its pandemic-accelerated initial arrival in 2020. This is about where we are, what's ahead, and how we can be framing or reframing our approaches, roles, and working lives overall to more easily and smoothly adapt, using language that clearly represents what we are trying to achieve to help us get there. What mindsets do we have and need? How are our relationships with learning and work evolving? How do leaders improve employee skill sets and effectiveness, especially empowered with AI tools? How are the rules of work changing? And more that we need to be asking ourselves, figuring out, and working through. I'm delighted to be talking again with Gary Bolles, Chair for the Future of Work at Singularity University. He is also co-founder of eParachute and the author of The Next Rules of Work, the mindset, skill set, and tool set to lead your organization through uncertainty. I interviewed Gary on the show in April 2020, when we discussed how crisis responses could generate a great reset at work. I invited him to return for an update to understand how much we have moved on from the old rules and adopted the next rules of work. Gary, how are you?
I'm wonderful. Thank you. How are you?
I am very well and very excited to be speaking with you again 3.25 years on after we last spoke in April 2020.
Was something happening at that time? I can't remember. Was there some major shift occurring? I don't track on that. Memory blurs.
Yeah, we had a very interesting conversation about what could be, because we saw the future of work coming, happening, arriving. Any listener who wants to go back, listen to that. And we're going to be talking about where we are now. So, Gary, in terms of where you feel that the world is now and where we feel we are, and thinking about what's ahead.
So first off, it was a very memorable conversation for me because when you were in an era of 100% uncertainty, you said the fog is so thick down the highway you absolutely can't see beyond your nose. It's always fascinating to look back and say, well, so how did we deal with that? How were we thinking about that? And I think as part of the discussion I had with you and with others at the time, I wrote an article called Welcome to the Great Reset. Because what I was suggesting was this isn't just like a pause. We're not going to go home for a little bit and then go back. It's pretty likely that this is going to be a reset of work. It's going to be a reset of how we work. And I talk a lot about the 6 W's. And I was writing my book at the time. And so Next Rules of Work. And so the visual that I often suggest people have in their minds in all the ways that work continually changes is to think in series of waves. So if you picture a wave, which was the old rules of work, 9-to-5 jobs, 5 days a week, then there was this newer wave where we were experimenting, and now we call that hybrid work. Okay, you can work from home a day a week. Fine, that's it. And then there are these next rules, which are all of the things that you and I have been discussing for years now around flexible work, around a flexible mindset, a flexible skill set, a flexible tool set, and how this is really what humans are meant to do. When we all were agrarian and we worked on, we were hunter-gatherers and we worked on farms, and you would do 27 things in a day. You didn't just do the same thing over and over again, right? And so
Right.
this is how we solve problems as humans. We're pattern recognizers. We're general purpose problem solving machines. We have and so we when we fall into the old rules, it's not often in many work roles the way that we're sort of optimized to work. However, the way where we are now is all three of those waves are coexisting. So there are people who lead organizations who
Yeah.
grew up in the old rules of work, and that's how they think success operates. And
Hmm.
they've bungee corded back to the old rules. And they're,
Mm.
the Elon Musks of the world who laid off 80% of Twitter and told the other 20% that they have to sleep under their desks have bungee corded back to those rules. And there are people that are experimenting and trying to sort of thread the needle and sort of guess with this hybrid thing. Okay, at what point will my workers revolt? And then there are others that have simply embraced, no, no, this is where the world's going. We have to do this.
Hmm.
And they're often the ones who either have people who courageously lead their organizations, or they have a very flexible workforce, often
Hmm.
comprised of much younger workers who don't have anywhere near the experience in the old rules or
Right.
don't want the old rules because they think they're toxic. And the people who lead those organizations must or feel compelled to be able to embrace them and to be able to come up with a new operating system for the ways that we all collaborate together to create value for our stakeholders.
And what's so challenging about the new ways of working is how leadership needs to change so much. And I think that obviously is one of the big mindset shifts. It is being much more collaborative and iterating and leading in a very, very different way. And I do empathize with the folks who've been leading with those old rules for so long. How are you seeing ways to try and change some of them? Because it is very hard to change very entrenched ways of working, even if we had the pandemic to shake everything up.
When I spend time with CEOs of large organizations, with the people who lead large government agencies, what I try to help them to see is there's nothing wrong with the value you created and the hierarchy you came up in the old rules of work. That's the way it worked. I mean, there's lots of things that weren't great for everybody, but that's what you learned.
Hmm.
Each of us as humans, we have a certain capacity for adaptation and change and a certain set of incentives and disincentives. And so when the incentive is that you get to keep your company alive and your workers get to keep their jobs, and the disincentive is you could go out of business, then you're going to embrace remote work, as we called it, during the pandemic.
Right.
And then when you feel that those incentives and disincentives have changed, you're going to bungee cord back to the old rules. And so what I tell them is, I think that's actually a failure on our part. It's wasting a perfectly good pandemic because we showed that we can trust. We showed that we can imbue teams with the power to be able to decide when and where and with whom and how and so on, the six W's of work. And then we took it away from them. And so that is an opportunity for you as somebody who leads an organization to be able to embrace these next ways of working, to be able to realize this is what creates much more human centric work. And the biggest challenge is helping them to accept that there is often a propagation delay. That is, there's a time, there's a window where you adopt these practices and it's messy and you have to figure it
Mm.
out. And then once you embrace them, then you start to see what you would think of as the metrics that will help you to believe you're made the right decision. I don't use things like productivity but people are
No.
more effective, they're happier, I don't use words like
Yes.
engagement, but they like their work more, they like their coworkers more, they want to stay with your company as opposed to jumping ship.
Hmm.
And so that is an opportunity to learn a new mindset and to learn a new skill set and to leverage the new tool set, especially these AI tools, to be able to embrace those next rules of work.
I found many senior executives and CEOs who see the future of work as being only the ways that we're working. It's to do with hybrid models or remote working models. It's not an integral piece of the entire future of work puzzle, which is so much more. There is so much more that is changing that needs to be adapted to the hows, the ways that we're operating, the nonlinear nature of work, all those different elements. Is that what you're seeing in terms of there being this disconnect between the location of where work is done with all these integrated, interdependent elements that are part of the next rules of work and business? So that without that realization, there is an assumption that it could be separated out and dealt with differently, and then we can move forward. And I think a lot of people, not just these leaders, also don't necessarily see the big picture. There are so many different things that are changing that I can understand wanting to get on with my work and get my work done and deal with my KPIs and not look at this whole big picture.
The imperatives for the way so much of business, of capitalism, our peculiar form of capitalism in the Western world operates is there's tons of quarterly pressure. There's a lot of push for this, absolute tactical thinking, and especially when things change so often, you're constantly you feel like you are constantly trying to just focus on the moment,
Mm-hmm.
and very very hard to pull back. As our good friend John Hagel says, that it's easy to zoom in, but you can't zoom. It's harder to zoom out.
Right.
And so I offer a couple of different ways to think differently, a different mindset for people who lead organizations. So let's say you could wave a magic wand and you had a complete, perfect knowledge of all the problems that your organization needs to solve. And that's the framing that I put it in. That's the value you need created. There's problems to solve for your customers, for your supply chains, for your shareholders, and other stakeholders. And then you have skills. You've got human capability. You've got, and we'll take the technology out of the equation for the moment and just say, what if you could have a complete, perfect knowledge about all the demand and all this supply, and it could all dynamically bind together automatically on an ongoing basis. That is, every time a new problem occurs for your customers, your people would know, and they would go attack that problem, solve the problem, create a solution, and move on to the next one without you, as somebody who leads an organization, ever having to say a word. What if you could envision that world? Well, why don't you have that world? You don't trust, that is, you don't trust the people that have all of the skills to identify those problems and to follow your priorities for solving those problems. And you suspect that they're not working hard enough. They're not productive enough. You suspect because you can't see it. You just assume that there are people, especially if you have a large organization, that there are people that are slacking or that aren't following your priorities or aren't doing it your way.
Right.
So if we were to take ego out of the equation, which of course is impossible, we're humans, but if we were to take ego out of the equation and instead say it's just a problem to solve, is to figure out how you have that operating system, you would be thinking far more flexibly in your own mind, because you would be saying, I can't possibly make all those decisions. I can't possibly know what customers want at every single moment. I don't have all this visibility in my organization and my supply chain. I have to train and support workers and teams, especially, and retrain managers so they become more of what I call team guides, because they have to be the ones to continually dynamically bind around the new problems.
So, Gary, to the point about agency, which we talked about last time, leaders needing to give more agency to their employees, there's also been this huge shift with workers, with the dynamic of being able to have more say, more decisions, being able to craft one's working life differently. And particularly in the US, I've seen that the Great Recession, as it has been called, and the numbers continue to be very high in terms of how many people are moving to different companies. How do you see people claiming more agency for their lives, as well as how that sits within organizations and how they're working, because that is an element of the future of work in terms of responsibility and accountability being pushed down and out across organizations. That also is a big and necessary mindset shift for leaders and managers.
I think one of the challenges and opportunities with this, embracing of the next rules of work is the great resignation, quiet quitting, all of these arms race attempts by the media to grab and keep our attention
Yeah.
I think basically just not only mischaracterizing, misunderstanding a lot of these dynamics, but I go back to the picture of the waves and what they're basically. What I think people are trying to get their arms around is because we've got these sort of three different approaches to work that are all happening at the same time. One of the things, the inevitable trends, and young people especially are the ones I think pushing it forward, but is the idea that this actually should be a process of co-creation between a worker and their work, and that it should be a continuous co-creation. Now, there are some work roles, some jobs that are very static, and you sign up for that, and that's what it is, and it's not going to change. But that is considered a diminishing percentage of work because even for some of those really repetitive kinds of jobs, people want it to be more human centric. They want it to be more human kinds of work. And so what I think is inevitable is we're going to find that once you've given people agency, the opportunity to be able to make decisions, to be able to have some level of autonomy, they don't want to give it back. And I think that's a perfectly reasonable request. And so if you're somebody who leads an organization, that is a mindset that you are going to find you're going to need to adapt to more and more. And it's not just young people, and it's not just the people that have felt at the low end of the power dynamic. That balance between the employer and the employed is always like a table, and sometimes it's very tilted in the favor of the employer. And what has happened with more flexible work is it's a much more balanced table. And that, again, takes a very, very different mindset by the people who lead the organization. You have to feel that you can actually trust, you can give power to others to make good decisions. And if you have transformed your own process of leading, if you have developed this, what I call the next mindset and skill set, you actually get all these benefits. There's all these problems that get solved that never reach your desk. But it takes embracing that mindset and believing that you can assign trust and agency to others, and you will get all the results and more that you would want.
There are two very different aspects to that, which I'd love to hear your opinion about. One is how that is effectively, I would say, rebalancing the social contract, which has been very unbalanced over the last several.
Or ignored. Just plain ignored.
Yes. There's a very important piece of that, which has been picked up by the media in terms of battle, power, who has power, shifting power, very negative. I do think the conversation about the social contract is incredibly important in terms of finding something that is sustainable for the long term and for the future.
So absolutely. Here's two ways to think about that power dynamic. And the first for me is I often talk about the picture of ourselves and the way that we think about our own skills and needs and experiences, kind of like an iceberg. There's this little bit above the waterline that we're aware of. We can list a certain number of skills, and then we kind of peter out. And there's a whole bunch of experience and potential, and often that even we individually are unaware of. But that is, you can think of it as the whole human being. And in the past, employers did the same thing. They hired for this tiny little bit of skills that they were aware of above the waterline. And there's all these other aspects of human life that the employer said, I don't need to know about that. I'm just going to cover my ears and make some noises, and I don't even have to look, right? And then along comes a pandemic, and suddenly you and I are looking into each other's homes on Zoom calls, and we realize, no, that's a whole person. And if I'm an employer, if I'm a person who leads an organization, I have to be responsible for their physical health,
Mhm.
their mental health, their emotional health, the whole person. And that's not what I signed up for in the old rules of work.
Right.
Work is work. You just showed up, you did your job 9 to 5, and then you went home. And so, or maybe I was able to convince you, no, you should work even harder. Work when you go home, but I'm not
Right.
responsible for the rest of your life. I'm not
Mm.
responsible for the negative consequences on your own personal
Mm.
life and your
Right.
family. I believe we're in a new era. So the first thing is, no, we have to open the aperture again. We can't just shut our minds and our eyes to what's below the waterline. We have to embrace the whole person. Second part of it is each of us as individuals operate in a range of domains. And it's not just the organization. We
Right.
operate in communities, physical and virtual communities that we are continually, not just within our work context, but outside of the work context, that we're continually interacting with. And organizations have that footprint as well. And so the
Mhm.
social contract is two things. One is with the workers, because those workers as humans, and then the ripple effect of where they spend and where they live has an
Mhm.
impact on communities. And then the communities that the organization itself operates in, its customers, its partners, the planet.
Right.
Both of those are, we have to look below the waterline in both of those arenas. And so more and more organizations have to be committed to not just the whole person but the whole community. That is, they have these impacts that are not negative externalities. They
Mhm.
are part of the way that the organization shows up in the world, and increasingly organizations have to take responsibility for
And to the other piece of how agency plays out
that. Yeah.
with regard to companies and workers, employees and non-employees. When I'm asked as a futurist or whatever I'm called, what do you see as being ahead? I see many companies having a much smaller core full-time employee group, many more part-time employees, non-employees, that blended mix, the blended talent pool, taxes and employment insurance and many different elements need to change the result. And ultimately that will be a strong stable environment for whatever configuration of employment and work that people want to have and how they blend with the organization, whatever employment arrangement they want. And that dovetails and is integral with how we're moving forward because there are so many new arrangements,
Yeah.
things to be thinking about. And it's complicated. There's obviously the side of it which says that it isn't supporting the workers. It's not rebalancing the social contract. Ultimately, I believe it really is.
Yeah.
But it's very messy between here and there.
So you're absolutely right, and again, I want to offer people who lead organizations a framing. And
Mhm.
I don't want to ever be the word police, but I try to use different language so we really sort of rethink about these things. So first off, there's the relationship with the organization, and then there's the way that the organization builds that operating system, the infrastructure to be able to deal with much more, not just flexible work, but a flexible workforce. So
Mhm. Right.
what I say, I believe that what we're heading towards is not a workforce and not a network, but a worknet. That is
Mm.
that it is a flexible flow of humans, of talent, that has a range of degrees of membership in the organization. And
Oh, I like
so,
that.
yeah, and so we have a model we call GEMS: growth, effectiveness, membership, and synchrony. So I'm just going to focus on membership.
Yep.
Fuzzy set theory says that you're not just binary like set A or set B. You actually have a percentage of membership, right? The person who is a full-time employee on site at the mothership in the headquarters is pretty much 100% membership.
Okay.
But the guy who delivers the pizza to your team late at night has a 0.0001 degree of membership.
Got it. Okay.
Yet that guy might have helped your team to stay late so that you could come up with your next $1 billion product. And
Right.
so the more you think of that as a flow of human capital with a
Oh,
varying degree of membership in the organization, now you think about, well, how can I help to increase membership and stop using the word engagement? How can I help
right.
people to feel like they are more connected to my organization? And that's a combination that can be co created. And
Right.
then what is that core? The ones that have 90 to 100% membership How do I reward them? How do I help them to feel like they're part of that core? I
Mm-hmm.
often point to Upwork as a perfect example. They've got 2,000 people that work for them. 75% are gig workers on their platform. And
Mm-hmm.
so there's a
Right.
core of 25% that are full time, 100% membership people.
Right.
So that's the first thing to be thinking about in terms of degrees of membership. And then the second is, what's the infrastructure for that? How do you I mean, CHROs heads explode, quite understandably, when I describe a worknet and I
Right.
tell them how that can operate. And they say, well, I have no idea how I would do that. And I would say, you already have a great analog for how to deal with this level of complexity, and it's in security. Cybersecurity
Mm.
used to have this exact same mindset about organizations that we do often about employees. There was a
Okay.
perimeter. It was
Right.
binary. You're either in
Yep.
the organization inside that perimeter, oh, we can secure
Mhm.
that, or you're
Right.
outside of it. We don't care what you do. And now, when you have a flow of human capital and a varying degrees of membership, what you have to have is a security model that basically has security follow every single individual and has to be adapted for everything that they're doing, what they're accessing, who
Mm.
they're communicating with, all that sort of stuff. We have solved all those problems.
Right.
There are cybersecurity models that do that. There is no reason we can't simply apply that exact same approach to
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
building compensation of one, work roles of one, teams of multiple, and
Right.
solving all of that with infrastructure at the same time.
Love it. It sounds easy.
No.
When
It's not easy. It's doable. It's a tractable problem. It is not an intractable problem.
Exactly. And there are, in most or many countries, laws that need to change, like the independent worker, which is proposed by the Hamilton Project.
Yep.
I'm still holding on to that as a very interesting idea that at some point maybe refloated again in order to try and find some middle ground. Who knows? Love that. WorkNet. Okay. I have to ask you, engagement. Why don't you like that? I understand productivity. Don't like productivity at all. Engagement.
So I'm again not trying to be the word police, but I do want to encourage anybody, in any role, any work role, to be thinking about what are the kinds of labels, what's the kind of mindset
Hmm.
that we use that has a balance. So the table's balanced. Engagement. I don't hear a lot of workers complain to me that they're not engaged. Like that's not the way that a worker would say it. A worker would
Right.
typically say, I want to feel motivated by my work. I want to feel like I have meaning in my work. I want to feel well
Okay.
compensated. I want to feel recognized. Those are all the things that a worker wants. They don't say engagement. And so
Okay.
when Gallup does its famous study every year, the reason I push back is there's a lot of data inside the engagement metrics that I believe are balanced. But the label, the mindset, the approach of engagement is very employer centric. And that's why I come back to membership. Because in the same way, performance can become toxic. I talk
Yeah.
about effectiveness because everybody
Hmm.
can sign up for being effective in their work. Effectiveness is
Right.
just an agreement between what the work role is and the work you're doing and whether or not you think that's a good match. It's the
Hmm.
same thing with membership. Is everybody can sign up. Oh, I get it. You know what? I'm okay with having 50% degree of membership in my main job because I'm doing all this gig work on the side, and the employer is fine with that as well because hey, we're only paying you half time. You should be doing
Right.
other work. I want you doing other work.
Right.
If I'm paying you full time, I don't know if I want you doing the other work. Well, it's okay if you're being effective, right? So,
Yeah.
so that is a co-created process. Membership is a co-created process. I don't feel that engagement is. Same thing with performance.
Thank you very much for explaining. I completely agree that words really matter. All the more now, it seems, particularly as we're moving into this new era and trying to come up with terms that actually are clear, like hybrid and remote. These have so many different meanings, even amongst people who are passionately for remote work. There are lots of different ways of interpreting it. When we're thinking about all of these new ways of working, I really do see that it is the youngest members of our workforce that are the ones who, without years of entrenched ways of doing things, they are manifesting. They're the ones who can really show us the most clearly what the future of work looks like. And it's a very different experience. And the ways that shows up for me is how they're moving around, how they're responding to skills, how they're gathering skills, how they're exploring when there are many jobs for them that don't exist yet. How are you experiencing how these fresher workers are reacting to, responding to, and trying to become competitive and achieve financial stability in this new environment?
You're exactly right. And so people who lead organizations have always had to deal with multi-generational workforces. It's just that uh, the younger ones fell into the old rules of work because
Right,
that's all the signals that they got, and it's the only alternative that they saw.
right.
Stop talking about meaning in your work. Just do your work, right? Stop
Yes,
complaining. And oh, by the way, you don't have a lot of other options. Like,
right.
you want this job, 50 other
Yeah,
people want this job. Do your work.
yeah.
And the people who lead organizations have always had to deal with multiple generations and always had to deal with younger people, but they in the past would more frequently fall into the social contract of the
Right.
organization, right? Falling in the old rules. And this younger generation doesn't have that experience. They just worked through a pandemic. They believe that there's lots of market signals for what they could do. They can go drive for Uber tomorrow if they have a toxic boss. And
Right.
so back to your point around agency, what that does is that creates a narrative, unfortunately for a lot of people who lead organizations, that they correlate things that are not correlated. They
Mm,
correlate youth and the belief that they should have agency with laziness. And that's an old rules label.
right. Right.
There is not a young person I have found who, given the opportunity to understand what they can be doing in terms of meaningful, well paid work, work that resonates with them, work that has some aspect that motivates them. I haven't found a single young person that doesn't want to do that.
Mhm.
What's
Right.
different is that the people who lead organizations who ascribe to the old rules simply want to send all the market signals that this is the way they want workers to behave, and those
Mhm.
young people aren't behaving that way. And
Yeah.
so they're bereft. I
Yeah.
mean, the people who lead
Right.
organizations are bereft. They don't know how to
Mm.
motivate them. They don't know because they don't have that operating system. They haven't put in place that process of co-creation. They don't even
Right.
believe they should. They think
Correct.
that the
Yeah.
young worker should simply fall into the old rules. And so
Mhm.
I have tremendous compassion, but I also believe you just have to figure it out. Like, you've got to make this commitment to
Mhm.
building this kind of more flexible work environment, because that's the only way you're going to attract and retain these workers. And it's not just young workers. You're going to see this ripple effect
For
throughout
sure.
multi-generational organizations.
I had a very interesting conversation with a group. In the discussion, there were a lot of definitive, clear answers from the group in answer to my questions until it got to what I thought was a simple question, which was, and so what do you want to be doing? This is a group of Gen Zs, career wise. What do you want to be doing 5 to 10 years' time? Silence, confusion,
Yeah.
YouGov data. 54% of 18 to 24-year-olds in 2019 believe they're going to do a job that doesn't exist yet. Very interesting. It means that it doesn't make sense to decide a career now because it's going to be different in a few years' time. And also, if I'm not focused on a destination, I'm not focused on a career, which is a target that I'm aiming at, I'm going to emphasize much more the here and now. I'm sure I'm going to be corrected in some of my wording. um, but what
Sorry.
no, it's totally okay. No. I love learning and understanding some of the nuances that you're trying to point out, because not only do I learn about it, but we're talking about where some of these words have different meanings that
Yeah.
people need to understand what other people can be interpreting in those words. And that's really valuable, I think.
Yeah.
So, in terms of how these new career dynamics are affecting people and affecting the people who are trying to manage them without the experience, without the understanding about the new career landscape, these pathways that meander all over the place. How can managers understand that better and Gen Zs understand their own situations better?
So I want to encourage people who lead organizations to have tremendous compassion for young people who grew up in this era, because they were born around 9/11. They were children through the global recession. They're young adults in a global pandemic, and very few people have ever had that. There aren't a lot of other generations that have had that sequence of
Right.
precarity. And that precarity, in a precarious world, is the. Oh, and by the way, we're talking about our environment as well, and planet on fire.
Yeah.
There's a couple of things that I would just want to suggest in terms of mindset shift for those who lead organizations to understand. So, and some of your listeners know, my father wrote this book, What Color Is Your Parachute? The World's Career Manual. And after he wrote that book, he wrote a book called The Three Boxes of Life. And he said, look, I think our arc is kind of three stages. We get a big chunk of education, then a big chunk of work, and a little chunk of leisure in what I call the period formerly known as retirement. And so young people have gotten the message that world probably doesn't exist anymore. That they've gotten so much information about precarity. And so my father said back in 1986, if you were to turn it on its side, have lifelong work, lifelong learning, and lifelong leisure, lifelong fun, and you did that on an intentional basis. So what I say all the time is young people are coming out of college, vocational school, high school, and they are flipping the script. And what they're doing is they might be getting a day job, but they're still learning online with online courses, and then suddenly they have a toxic boss and they quit, and now they're driving for Uber, but they're working on a startup with their friends, and then they get another day job, but they only have 50% degree of membership. And it is a constantly changing landscape of learning and work and leisure, and they take a gap month with their friends. Parents ask me all the time, why won't my kid get a real job? This is the answer. It is a hedge strategy in the same way that your investment advisor would tell you to have some safe investments. That's your day job. Take a little bit more risk. That's driving for Uber. And take a lot more risk in a tiny sliver. That's working on a startup with your friends. In a world of almost complete uncertainty, there are no safe jobs. And you've gotten that message. And so what you're trying to do is all around optionality. You are trying to basically lay the groundwork for whatever might bring you value. And there's this mythical future thing that your parents are telling you about called retirement. It's like, why are you waiting to enjoy life until then? Does that make any sense in a world on fire? No. We're going to do it now. And so this is so I call this a portfolio of work. And so what increasingly and this ties into our degree of membership. What increasingly, if you lead an organization, you're going to have to be okay with is that you're going to have a range of membership by your workers, and especially the young ones want optionality. How can you embrace that? Or how can you at least have the kinds of agreements and the kind of structure that allows you to all be on the same page about what that degree of membership is?
Which, for me, would speak to culture in terms of how to connect everybody, no matter what level of membership they have or what kind of membership. There does seem to be that much more understanding now about how important culture is, finally. And there are many companies still that aren't leaning into that. What are some of the best ways that you are finding that people at all levels of an organization are connecting better and more effectively to create the community wherever people are?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't use the word culture much. I talk to CEOs all the time. I say, so what is your culture? And they'll give me the list of values on the micro kitchen wall. And I'll say, well, but wait a minute, isn't culture really just behavior? Are you talking about people's behavior and their mindset? How they think about each other, how they think about the organization, how they think about their team, how they think about their jobs. Isn't really mindset, and doesn't that just drive behavior? And if you've got an organization, you have 10,000 workers, don't you have a range of mindsets? And how can you be trying to define a single set of behaviors that you encourage? So the answer is in the old rules of work, you defined them. You went off to the executive retreat and you
Right.
decided what the culture was and its values in quotation
Hmm.
marks, and you stuck them on micro kitchen walls, and people saw that every time they came through, and you trained managers to reinforce those
Right.
behaviors, or at least reinforce those anchors, those values anchors. And at the other end of the spectrum, there are compassionate leaders of organizations that instead say, listen, I am not the arbiter of culture. What I want to do is I want to encourage certain behaviors where we treat each other with respect. We treat our stakeholders, especially our customers, with respect. We provide great value to them. I want all these behaviors to be
Right.
reinforced. And I don't have to be the one that puts all the labels on those things. Let's co create that.
Hmm.
Let's figure out what that needs to be. And so, back again to membership. If you've got a very distributed organization, chances are good you think, oh, well, then we have I don't even know what our culture is anymore because I can't reinforce culture. I can't do, this thing called management by walking around and look in people's
Yeah.
cubicles and, and reward the behaviors that I want and the values that I think we need to have. And instead, more and more organizations that are embracing these next roles are saying, let's make that a journey.
Okay.
Let's make that a process of continually defining who do we want to be? What behaviors do we need? I've got examples in my book. There's one organization, very, very successful online marketplace company. They wrote a manifesto
Hmm.
that they co-created with workers throughout the organization. It wasn't just the senior leadership team going off into a retreat. It was a process of co-creation, and everybody in the organization can see that manifesto. They can contribute ideas to it, so it's a living document. And so there are plenty of ways you can do this if what you commit to is that you are trying to increase degrees of membership. You're trying to empower people to have tremendous agency. You're teaching the people who lead teams to become team guides, much more the people with the best questions, and supporting the team members and becoming great problem
Hmm.
solvers. And if you're doing all of that, then you will see culture instead as a set of behaviors that you want to
Right.
encourage.
Right. Yeah.
And so to help a leader get the language around this, I say, all right, go have somebody, not you, ask 5 people in the
Right.
organization in the hallway or on Zoom calls, what are the 3 things you need to do in our organization to be successful?
Yeah.
And if they tell you, keep your head down, don't rock the boat, do what your boss says, you probably know what kind of culture you have. Or rather,
Yeah.
what you likely will get is 5 completely different answers
Mm.
because person's lived experience of the values and behaviors that are reinforced in many organizations varies tremendously.
Yeah.
And that's fixable, or that is co-creatable
Right. Right.
if you have the right mindset.
Agreed. I like the fact that the culture can be co-created. I do need to ask you another side point. We have talked about empathy, but now I hear you using the word compassionate. There doesn't seem to be any agreement about where the line is between compassion and empathy. Some say empathy is compassion without the action. Just for you to clarify, because words matter. Empathy for me and how I define it in my book and elsewhere is it has action in it. How are you defining compassion? Because it's a word that you've used many times.
Well, absolutely. So, I'm happy to default to whatever you feel is you've thought a lot about these issues quite a bit. So, whatever you feel is the most, appropriate or authentic way to be able to label it. They're very closely in the same
Right.
neighborhood. I'd say um, empathy is typically thought of as understanding the lived experience of another.
Hmm.
And so it's having empathy for your coworker, empathy for your customer, empathy for your
Right.
community, empathy for the planet. What is that lived experience, or what are the characteristics of thriving that another might have?
Hmm.
Um, I think of compassion as being the set of emotions around displaying that feeling of caring for another. If I can have compassion for you, it doesn't always mean I need to understand your lived experience. I simply can care about you as a human being. And so, whatever is the most comfortable label to use, I think, for people who lead organizations, what I would encourage is to be intentional about
Right.
it. Is, are you suggesting comes from that mindset? And so, Satya Nadella, for instance, at
Mhm.
Microsoft, he's recently been quoted as saying he thinks that empathy is the greatest superpower that humans have. That's just a mindset.
Right.
Like, that's one framing
Yep.
for these things.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We haven't talked yet about AI specifically. Obviously, AI has been around for a very long time and has been affecting our worlds and our work, our businesses for years and years without us necessarily being as conscious of it or as specific about how it is changing elements of the way that we're working, what we're doing, and how we're doing it. Now, with ChatGPT giving us a friendly interface that we can actually start to understand that, it seems to be throwing a very interesting and visible spanner in the works to show us how much more this new era of work is going to be requiring us to be flexible about how we're thinking about every single job in the organization. You have a lot of experience and understanding and many thoughts about AI, and you said that it seems on the tip of every CEO's tongue. How do you try and advise CEOs who are concerned about it, as well as the approach to moving forward with an organization and how we can be bringing everybody along and helping them use these increasingly powerful new tools to all of our advantage?
I think you used a great label for it is their tools. So in the next rules of work in the book, I talk about mindset, skill set, tool set.
Mhm.
And this is a new tool set. As a matter of fact, in that article that I mentioned in April of 2020, when we
Mhm.
last talked,
Right.
uh, I said the quote in the article was, "Today it's a pandemic. Tomorrow it's artificial general intelligence."
Mm.
Well, thankfully, we have general intelligence, or at least we have some what some people believe is the nascent development of artificial general intelligence. But I think most experts will agree we're still a long ways from it.
Right.
However, it is a general purpose set of tools that can be used in a very wide range of uh, problem solving steps and creation steps, especially content creation. And so I would suggest to people who lead organizations two mindsets. The first is on the plus side. This is a massive sea change in the way that people can do a lot of work. If work requires synthesis, that is taking information from a variety of different sources, if work requires generating a whole bunch of created ideas to be able to get the best idea, if work involves understanding information from a variety of disparate domains, these tools are all awesome at all those things. And it work that depends on them, for instance, like call center work, will increasingly be performed. More and more of the tasks will be performed by these kinds of tools,
Right.
kind of inevitable.
Mhm.
There is a transformative process in work. And the more organizations, and this is something you and I have discussed before, the more organizations can already be biased towards transformation. They can already be leveraging digital tools. And then this new tool set comes along. They can simply figure out, oh, here's the new way we can do X. And then they can help their workers to be able to quickly get up to speed on those
Mhm.
tools, to be able to leverage those tools for their work, and then to be able to develop new skills, to be able to solve new problems. Now, the flip side of that, the other side of the ledger, is that it will allow people who lead organizations to be able to automate a lot of tasks that were being done by humans. And this is automation does
Right.
over and over again, going back to the loom weaver and Luddites. However, it's happening so quickly and it's affecting such a wide range of work roles. What I believe intentional, hopefully compassionate and empathetic leaders need to do is to focus on what they must do to continually help workers to have the skills to leverage the tools and then to have a work environment where they can be solving new problems, not just treat them as we have so often in the past as redundant workers whose skill set is no longer needed. And if you're embracing the new tools, that's awesome. I believe that a completely connected responsibility is to solve the problem for how the workers who get displaced continually have access to, training for, and the development in the next work to be done.
Right. Which is a perfect segue to be ending with skills, the skills focused, skills first, that is how we're moving forward, because the skills that we're needing, the way that we're completing our tasks and working together in teams, working together in projects, non-routine work has been growing significantly over the last 20 years, as has collaborative work. How can we be preparing people for that as they're coming into the workforce in the education system, and having organizations that have that mindset of continuous learning and upskilling and constantly, which can be exhausting for some people. I love learning on an ongoing basis, but I'm not necessarily the norm. And there are many people who don't want to have to do that.
I mean, a couple of framings I think are helpful. First off, just understanding Carol Dweck's framing in the book Mindset around fixed versus growth mindset. There's nothing wrong with a fixed mindset, but a growth mindset helps you to continually learn. And along comes a pandemic and you can't go into the 9 to 5 job and the 5 days a week and so on. You can't do the mind numbing commute, and you have to learn a new approach, new ways of doing work. If you have a fixed mindset, that was really hard.
Sure.
And your growth mindset, that's just another tool set to leverage, another new context. And so we need to help workers, help individuals across the board, starting in very early in elementary school, to be able to learn a skill set. And the skills are much more what I call flex skills. They're skills usable in a range of situations, unfortunately, often called soft skills. There's nothing soft about them. But there's skills like problem solving and collaborating and communicating, and the things that are all quite teachable when we're young, but are sort of left to default. And instead, we focus on these what I call no skills, KNOW skills, which are bodies of knowledge.
Right.
And we keep thinking if we just shove more bodies of knowledge into those little heads, that they'll be able to work when they're, find or create meaningful, well-paid work when they're older. And that's not the way the world is working. The shelf life of that information, of those skills, is decaying so rapidly. And so we have to explicitly teach these much more flexible skills. And then employers have to demand them. They have to demand that people social and emotional learning baked in, so that they're really, really good in social situations. They're good with teamwork. They're good with collaboration, because that's the way the world is going to work. And so our education systems are not typically up to the task today. They're often government distributed, and they are very biased towards these bodies of knowledge as opposed to these much more flexible skills. But employers can change that game. They can actually demand that these young people and older workers as well are coming in with these skills. They can train for them, and then because the shelf life of information is decaying so much, employers must sign up for paying it forward.
Right.
They have to put aside the worry that if you train somebody, they're going to leave. Because my answer is, if you don't train them, they're going to leave. And so make the investment. And what you'll find if you pay that forward is we will all benefit. The workers will benefit. They'll have much higher degree of membership because they'll have greater loyalty to you for having trained them. Continually show them the problems that they can be solving so they can dynamically bind around those. They're going to be much more flexible in their approach, and they're going to find problems that you didn't even know about that they could solve. If you train those former managers to be team guides, they will embrace this model of a much more flexible worknet with people dynamically binding around problems. And all of those pieces will help you to be able to have the organization that can not just meet the needs of today's customers and other stakeholders, but as my friend Charlene Lee says, the customer of tomorrow as well.
Inspiring, Gary, as always. And it always sounds very easy when you say it like that.
Simple, but easy.
Simple, but not easy. My last point, I'm always trying to give a helpful takeaway to listeners to do something tomorrow that is concrete, that can really move their organization, team, their department forward a little bit. There are so many things we've talked about at a very high level. We've got practical and tangible in many different areas. Obviously, every company is different. They have different workers, different workforces, operations. But overall, based on the companies and leaders that you work with, what is one or maybe two small steps that people can take tomorrow that would be helpful moving forward in this new environment?
Absolutely. So I'll give you one, because let's just try to keep it. It's not easy, but it's simple. I'll try to keep it simple. So if there's one inflection point, if there's one place in the organization that I believe has the most impact, it is that role of the manager, supervisor, leader, all words that I don't typically use. Instead, call them a team guide.
Okay.
And so if you want to do one thing, it's completely rethinking your mindset around what that role is, how you train people for that role, and how you reward people for that role.
Okay.
So if it's all around productivity and trying to squeeze the most out of every worker and forcing your managers to be the ones that are always having the right answer, I believe that's not going to create the flexible work net that you want of tomorrow. And instead, just rethink that process, rethink what that role is, rethink how you can help them to become team guides throughout your organization, and what the combination of incentives that helps them to reinforce that behavior is. And then for you, as someone who leads an organization, try it yourself. So Novartis, longtime client of mine, 100,000 person organization, they have a great process that they call unbossing. You're supposed to do, if you have the highest title in the room, you are supposed to look around the room and you're supposed to say, how can we unboss this meeting? And what it means is, how can I not be the person who comes up with the answer? How can you be the ones that are co-creating our solution? Let's first understand the problem we're trying to solve, and then co-create that solution. And then I am here simply to remove roadblocks. If you need more people, if you need more budget, if there's something that's standing in your way, that's what I'm here for. But I'm not the problem solver. You are. And I'm simply here when you identify a problem that I could be helpful with. But when we leave this meeting, I will only take the action items that relate to me removing roadblocks. You take the action items where you will be solving the problem yourselves. So give it a try. See how it goes.
That's fantastic advice. Thank you so much, Gary. It has been such a delight to have you on again. I look forward to hopefully not another 3.25 years before we speak again. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much. It's a wonderful conversation. Be well.
Thank you again so much to Gary Bolles, Chair of the Future of Work at Singularity University, co-founder of eParachute.com and author of The Next Rules of Work. You can follow Gary on LinkedIn and Twitter at gbolles, GBOLLES, and also visit eParachute.com. Immediate action tip: reframe managers and supervisors as team guides. Rethink the process, what their role is, and how you can help them to guide teams throughout your organization. To unboss meetings and be there to remove roadblocks so team members can co-create solutions. For more understanding of and actions to navigate the future of work, check out my book, Empathy Works, The Key to Competitive Advantage in the New Era of Work. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend, like it, and write a quick review. For regular video updates, curated useful articles, research, and other information, follow me on LinkedIn and sign up for my Work in Progress newsletter there. My blog is available on sophiewade.com and flexelnetwork.com. Until next time.